Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers was released in 1989 and was directed by Dominque Othenin-Girard and stars Donald Pleasence, Ellie Cornell, and Danielle Harris. Set 1 year after the events of The Return of Michael Myers, the film follows Jamie Lloyd, the niece of Michael Myers, who has been institutionalized after killing her stepmother at the end of the last film, which has left her traumatized as well as mute. Things escalate when it looks as if Michael Myers has returned once again to finish what he started. Happy Halloween, everybody. The Revenge of Michael Myers is definitely near the bottom when it comes to my personal ranking of the Halloween movies, and is a huge disappointment when compared to Halloween 4, which I consider to be my favorite Halloween film. I know some people might still be shocked by that, but it's just how I feel. So, when we finally get to Halloween 5, there's so many directions that you could take the story, and Halloween 4 points in what would have been the most interesting direction, following Jamie Lloyd as the new killer of the franchise, and perhaps explore a little of the psychology of what creates evil. Well, for Halloween 5, they decided not to do any of that, and to pretty much make a typical boring slasher film with a few good ideas, few bad ones, and a ton of missed opportunities. Now, I want to get this out of the way. I don't hate this film. I know there's plenty of people that probably do, and even I can admit there's a lot in this film that isn't very good. But at the end of the day, I still love this franchise and can't really say I detest any of the films in the franchise. Some are good, some are not so good, dare I even say bad, but I enjoy watching them nonetheless. Halloween 5 for me is one of those not-so-good films as it is for a lot of people, and we will be getting into why this film doesn't work, but I do want to bring up some of the few things I do like about the film as well. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about the production of this film. After the moderate success of Halloween 4, Halloween 5 was quickly put into production and set to release only a year after the previous film, making it, at the time, the shortest wait between films. The director and writer of 4, Alan B. Elroy and Dwight H. Little, were asked to return for the sequel, but both declined, already feeling pleased with their own film, but hoped that a follow-up would continue the story they had set up in the film. Eventually, playwright Shem Bitterman was hired to write the script, titled Halloween 5, The Killer Inside Me, which would have followed an evil Jamie Lloyd and a resurrected Michael Myers. But this was passed on because producer Mustafa Akkad was clear he only had interest in making a film with Michael Myers as the sole antagonist. This pretty much killed any hope of a film that would deliver on the promise of the last film. Bitterman wrote a second draft, and Jeff Burr, director of From Whisper to a Dream, was being considered to direct, but it was finally given to Dominque Othenin-Girard based off of a recommendation by Deborah Hill. Othenin-Girard would infamously throw Bitterman's draft into a trash can in front of Akkad, and so a new draft was born from writer Robert Harder, who wrote a story inspired by Frankenstein, with a Michael Myers who, after being resurrected, was no longer evil and instead pursued by the mob. The pitch was ultimately rejected, and Othenin-Girard and co-writer Michael Jacobs devised a new story they titled Halloween 5 and Things That Go Bump in the Night. Othenin-Girard would go on to add things such as Jamie's inability to speak, as well as her telepathic connections to Michael. Othenin-Girard also wanted to create a Michael Myers that people could relate to, believing it to be scarier that someone that might have the will to do good could end up doing so much evil. Filming was a whole other mess. Unable to find a house that matched the look of the original Myers house, the filmmakers decided on a mansion which would provide the space they needed to film the scenes they wanted to shoot. The film is also infamous for having scenes of Michael having a tattoo on his wrist and a mysterious man in black whose identity is never revealed in the film. These ideas were ultimately just ideas that could be explored in other films. Even the people making the film had no idea what any of these things were while filming the film. Upon its release, Halloween 5 was considered a box office disappointment, only making $11.6 million on a $5.5 million budget, as compared to the previous film's box office of $17.8 million. The film was also critically panned, being criticized for being like any other slasher film, and its loose ends, like the Man in Black, likened to a soap opera. It's clear by now that the film we got ended up being the least interesting version of the film we could have gotten, and ended up being just another slasher film in a long line of other slasher films. However, even though I agree with this, there still is something about this film and the Halloween franchise as a whole that still elevates it over some other slasher movies for me. Even if the film itself isn't that great, the mythology and the world feels more meaningful. But anyway, let's get into the actual review. Halloween 5 sadly makes a bad first impression when you start it, right from the opening credits, which pales in comparison to the brilliant opening credits of the first two films, and the subtle, atmospheric opening of the fourth film. It's just flashes of a pumpkin getting hacked to pieces with little to no music that only creeps in near the end to reveal the title. It just feels lazy in comparison and doesn't do a very good job of establishing the tone for the film, which I have to admit is really weird. The film sometimes feels like it's trying to be a comedy. One of the big complaints of the film comes from these two policemen who are literally two of the worst policemen in horror. These guys are idiots, and the film points out that they are idiots through a small little music track for them that's played only once, but it's so bizarre. The film also focuses too much on the annoying side of slasher films. This is a problem a lot of the Friday the 13th movies have, where there are annoying characters with absolutely no character who are meant to just be annoying, and then they eventually die. Sadly, the whole second half of this film is made up of these characters. I know a lot of people that hate this film talk about Tina and how bad she is, and don't get me wrong, this character can be annoying, but rewatching it this time, she doesn't feel as annoying as people make it out to be. She's ditzy and carefree and a little obnoxious and stupid, but it's clear her heart can sometimes be in the right place. But my real hatred comes to the other characters, such as Tina's friend, especially the character of Spitz, who I think hands down is the worst and most annoying character in this film. The movie also makes some pretty ballsy decisions early on in the film that I think could have worked if this was a better written movie. One of these decisions is the death of Rachel. I don't mind this death. I know it bothers a lot of people, seeing as she is such an important character in the last film and is a genuinely likable character, but her death ends up falling flat in the end. This is one of the first kills in the film, and there's a lot of setup for this death. But it's not shot in a way that makes me feel anything for the character, and she's quickly forgotten as soon as she dies. There's not even a chance for Jamie to mourn, and just feels like a huge missed opportunity that could have actually led somewhere. Then there's the scene where Michael takes his mask off in front of Jamie. There's so many people I know that genuinely hate this, and hate any time anyone tries to humanize Michael in any way. And I'm here to say, I don't really mind or have a problem with the idea in theory. In execution, it's a different story. This was the scene that Othenin-Girard was adamant about doing. He wanted people to relate to Michael. Taking off his mask, showing that there is someone underneath it, is a fine idea on its own. This could be a great scene. Michael is the only family Jamie has left, and she tries to reach out to him for a slight moment. It seems like it might work. But what ruins this scene and this whole idea is Michael Myers sheds a tear. It just becomes a bit too much and almost laughable. Let's also talk about Jamie for a moment. They decided to not go with any of the promises given to us at the end of Halloween 4, so instead, we're left with a Jamie that is mostly mute through the entire film and is mainly pushed to the side, spending most of the movie in the same locations. Still, I have to give it to Danielle Harris. Even with very little lines, she manages to give a really good child performance that might even be better than her performance in the last film. It's definitely a more challenging role, and I think she pulls it off. With that said, we should probably talk more about some of the positives with this film, because I do have plenty of positives as well. Danielle Harris, of course, being one of them, but before we get into that, I do want to bring up two more things I don't really care for. The first is the whole ending of this film with the prison break. After the stellar ending of the last film, a prison break just feels so weird and out of place in this franchise. We have the mysterious man in black, who we've seen several times throughout the film, now just mowing down guys like he's a mobster from the 1930s. And that's how we keep Michael alive for the next film. It's just such a weird sequel bait kind of ending that just doesn't work in my eyes. And second, I want to bring up the man in black himself and the weird thorn tattoo that he and Michael both share. As mentioned before in my behind the scenes section, nobody on set knew what these things would end up being should they use them in a sequel. Of course, we know now, but at the time, these really must have felt like weird setups that did nothing to really add to the film. But were only there to get you to ask questions. They're not terrible additions in this film, they just feel so random and like a last-minute addition. But anyway, let's get into some of the positives finally. I mentioned how good I thought Danielle Harris was in this movie, but I also have to mention Donald Pleasence, who once again gives another awesome performance as Dr. Loomis. Now, I know there's a lot of people that are actually turned off by this Loomis portrayal in this film. He's much more antagonistic and angry and kind of a dick, especially to Jamie, but I love it. Pleasence plays Loomis this time around as someone who has seen enough, and he's tired of it, and will do anything, even put children in harm's way to stop Michael. His confrontation with Michael is one of my all-time favorite Halloween moments, when he's holding Jamie in front of him, trying to lure Michael. There's also some great speeches here and there that Loomis performs with class and importance. It's a really fun role this time around, and I love it. Even Tina has a small moment to shine in the film, and regardless of what people think of her, I like her scene where she is willing to sacrifice herself so that Jamie can get away from Michael. Also, that car chase with Jamie is also really good and kind of scary. Watching it again, I wasn't only fearing for Jamie's life, but the actress Danielle Harris as well. There's a lot of scenes in this film that maybe puts Harris in too much danger, such as the laundry chute scene where she's trapped in the Myers house. The scene is actually really tense, and the fear on Harris's face says it all. But my favorite scene in the entire movie has to be this imagined chase scene through the hospital, where Jamie thinks she's being chased by Michael. The music is tense and ramps up at just the right moments, and it's genuinely, I think at least, a scary scene in a film that really isn't all that scary. In fact, I'd say the music all around is pretty good. The iconic John Carpenter theme is, of course, really good, but the other tracks are solid too and provide a lot of tension and creepy vibes. I also like the idea that Jamie and Michael have this psychic link to each other. If you're going to not follow through on the promise of the events of the last film, the idea that they have something that links them together and that maybe Michael can kill through Jamie is an interesting thought that just isn't explored in this film. Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers, takes the interesting ideas left over from the last film and decides to make a sequel that just plays it a bit too safe. It's afraid to be anything more than another Halloween film and ends up being like any typical slasher. It has interesting ideas, but doesn't try to explore those ideas in any meaningful way. The film is also just kind of boring and a slog to get through. It's tonally weird with unlikable characters, but it does have a few saving graces with a couple of tense chase sequences, a solid musical score, and 2 really good performances from Danielle Harris and Donald Pleasence. I just wish that those good things were in a much better movie. So with all that said, I'm going to give Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers, a 4 out of 10. Halloween 5 is not a good film. It's a mess, but it's still a mess I can find some good to talk about. And it's still part of a franchise I love despite the quality of many of the sequels. Revenge of Michael Myers just happens to be one of those low points for me. But it's still a film I end up watching every Halloween along with the rest of the films in the series. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed this review as much as I enjoyed making it. Have a happy Halloween, and as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and stay positive.